Can personal assignments yield great street photography? Does a long-term project that takes years to create leave a longer-lasting impact than that of photos created to seek instant gratification so often found in social media today? This photographer put an intense amount of focus into several projects that took years to create that resulted in profound photography collections that were incredible upon their release and will most likely continue to be beloved by and inspiring to street photographers for generations to come. This is Street Smarts Volume 8, Bruce Davidson. Bruce Davidson was born in Chicago in 1933. He began to take photos not much later when he was just 10 years old. His career achievements include working with Life, the New York Times, becoming a member of Magnum, and having his photos shown in a number of art museums. Davidson's work includes projects that focus on the civil rights movement, Brooklyn gangs, Spanish Harlem, circus performers, and one that stands out as the perfect example of why picking a subject to focus on for a long period of time is something all photographers should consider if they want to manufacture a well-rounded expression of their vision. If I'm looking for a story at all, it is in my relationship to the subject, the story that tells me, rather than that I tell. This collection of photos highlights how the interplay of various photos surrounding the same subject matter can enhance each individual photo and bring more life to the body of work in its entirety. Subway by Bruce Davidson is the result of nearly 5 years of taking photos in New York City's subway system throughout the 1980s. These photos are synonymous with the portrayal of what NYC looked like during that time period. The graffiti and writing all over beat-up train cars set a mood and feeling that must have been felt by many during this era in the city's history. The aesthetic combined with that mood and feeling created photos that are beautiful to look at and seem to tell stories about the characters that inhabit them. I wanted to transform the subway from its dark, degrading, and impersonal reality into images that open up our experience again to the color, sensuality, and vitality of the individual souls that ride it each day. To do this, he switched from black and white film to color because black and white didn't do justice to the tones found in the derelict cars filled with gangs, homeless people, and everyday citizens. Davidson thought of the subway as a great social equalizer. From the moving train above ground, we see glimpses of the city, and as the train moves into tunnels, sterile fluorescent light reaches into the stony gloom, and we, trapped inside, all hang on together. The photos within this book are a mixture of candid shots and frames Davidson asked if he could take. At times, when Davidson felt a photo was too good to pass up, he'd simply take the risk and snap the shot. If there was a certain subject he wanted to photograph without any conflict, he would ask them if he could take their photo and provide examples of his work to compel them to understand his intent. This was necessary because the subway was such a rough place in the 1980s. What makes these photos unique are the conditions for capturing them and the anxiety it must have caused. Davidson had a fear of being attacked or mugged for his camera gear, and was also far from being low-key since he had to carry around a giant flash to take most of the photos. As I went down the subway stairs, through the turnstile, and on the darkened station platform, a sense of fear gripped me. I grew alert and looked around to see who might be standing by, waiting to attack. But this is what came with the lifelong nature of being compelled to be as close as possible to the subjects he was trying to capture. This was a choice he made when he worked on his project that focused on the civil rights movement. I made a decision early on not to buy a telephoto lens, to never be more than 1.5 meters from the protesters and the policemen I was photographing on the streets. I wanted to be almost in the picture. This relationship and proximity to his subjects, no matter who they were or how difficult and potentially hazardous the situation might be, was also a constant throughout his time working as a photographer. In regard to all of this in relation to his book Subway, Davidson stated, "Sometimes I'd take a picture, then apologize, explaining that the mood was so stunning I couldn't break it, and hoped they didn't mind. There was times I would take the picture without saying anything at all. But even with this last approach, my flash made my presence known. When it went off, everyone in the car knew that an event was taking place. The spotlight was on someone. It also announced to any potential thieves that there was a camera around. Well aware of that, I often changed cars or trains after taking pictures." Davidson would not have been able to create the beautiful and compelling photos of Subway if it weren't for the long-term projects that had come before it. Long-term projects that were created with intention and purpose are what make up much of what Davidson produced during his career, and the results would lead you to believe that maybe focusing on something similar can help any street photographer to make more visually appealing work that resonates with their viewers. His book Subway, along with the projects East 100th Street, Brooklyn Gang, and his coverage of the civil rights movement, all showcase the results a long-term photo project can yield. In 1959, with his project titled Brooklyn Gang, he met with a gang called the Jokers, after reading an article about their street fights in the news. Knowing they would be interesting subjects to capture based on what he read, he got to know them and followed them daily to capture what the lives of this alienated group were like in post-war New York City. In order to gain trust with the group, Davidson gave them prints of the photos he was taking that he says allowed him to become almost invisible and capture the photos he took once a mutual understanding was found. I think I was drawn to their life, their depression, their anger. I fit right into that. I was also aware that things could change for them and change for me because I wasn't that much older. I was 29, but I knew those emotions. In the mid-1960s, Davidson used a Guggenheim Fellowship to fund a project he created to document the civil rights movement. His coverage began in 1961 when he was put on an assignment by Magnum for the New York Times and joined the Freedom Rider buses traveling from Montgomery, Alabama to Jackson, Mississippi. In response to the bus trips, Davidson has stated, "We didn't know what was going on. There could very easily have been a sniper. We were afraid." In regard to a KKK meeting he attempted to cover during the same period of time, he was concerned that he would be considered an agitator, so he got out of there as fast as he could. Throughout the next 5 years, he captured photos of major events and figures that were part of the civil rights movement. Near the end of this project, Davidson found himself covering the Selma March that took place in March of 1965. Began with 300 demonstrators before later growing to 25,000 and involved a speech from Martin Luther King Jr. Davidson's photos helped to showcase the police brutality and everyday segregation that was taking place in America throughout those years. This time in his life is what began to intertwine politics into his photography. As a result of his coverage of the civil rights movement, he received the first ever photography grant from the National Endowment of the Arts. This continued push towards recognition and politics would lead Davidson into the next project he chose to cover in the early part of the 1960s. Even if Davidson claims to only be an observer in these situations. "I didn't want to be involved in anything. I wasn't good at politics. I liked to observe. You know, if you notice, in the photographs I made of Martin Luther King Jr., I didn't make my presence known to him. I observed him, and I have very good photographs of him and the mark he made, but I didn't go up and talk to him. I was a photographer." The project, titled East 100th Street, involves Davidson taking photos on one block of East Harlem to familiarize himself intensely with that one specific area. Long before taking on the project, he stated, "Even then, I wanted to get behind those walls and encounter the invisible." More than a decade would pass between the time Davidson first laid eyes on Harlem and when he spent 2 years, from 1966 to 1968, taking photos and revealing what had previously been invisible to him. The intentionality and purpose of this project was Davidson's pursuit to help improve the housing situation of people who lived in the area. Prior to his exploration of Harlem, other photojournalists had come to get easy-to-take, exploitative photos that resulted in the lack of trust from the community. The reason Davidson spent so much time on this project was to regain that trust and produce work that honestly reflected what was happening in regard to the cause he was trying to shed light on. Access was granted to him once he agreed to submit photos for review through the Metro North Citizen Committee. The honesty that shines through in these photos was the result of the process Davidson used to create them, which was dramatically different from the process he used to create the Subway project. The presence of a large format camera on a tripod with its bellows and black focusing cloth gave a sense of dignity to the act of taking pictures. I didn't want to be the unobserved observer. I wanted to be with my subjects face to face. The eye contact and proximity of his subjects created through this intimate process shines through in the work. Although there was a debate on how truly Davidson's work represented Harlem, members of the community professed that it was helpful in getting the ball rolling in ways that would begin to rebuild their community. "I'm an outsider on the inside. I'm better seeing on dark side of things than I am on the light. I think I'm also kind of an explorer, and I need commitment in order to exercise the passion I might have for a particular series of pictures. I always said to myself, my pictures begin the night before I arrive. Almost like a bullfighter, I would prepare myself emotionally to go into a world that's somewhat painful. In the case of my East 100th Street project, it took 2 years before I felt I finished looking here. I have to look someplace else. In response to the subjects of his photos from all these projects, Davidson says, I didn't have any agenda. They just felt good that someone wanted to see them. And that happens a lot with various bodies of work of mine, where people are glad you're there to see them because no one's paying any attention. Until next time, keep developing.